So this teaching is entitled The Law, to Keep or Not to Keep? That is the question. Speaking of questions, we're going to go over quite a few, about a handful of main questions, 6 I believe. First one's going to be, what is love and righteousness? Not just that, but what is the biblical definition of love and righteousness? Is it really what we think it is? Second one is going to be, does the law change? Then we're going to go over some characteristics of the law. We're going to ask, did the Messiah and his followers keep the law? We're going to go over how we're judged. And finally, the last one will probably be, do we have to keep the law today? So that being said, let's get started. So first, what is love and righteousness? So it might not be exactly what you might think it is. What I mean by that is there is actually a definite answer to that question, defining both love and righteousness in Scripture. It's not just this sort of feeling we have towards God, or some sort of abstract thing where we just kind of define it, and righteousness, yeah, that's this good thing, and love, that's that good thing. No, there's a very concise definition, in fact. And so it says in Deuteronomy 6:25, and it shall be our righteousness if we observe to do all these commandments before the Lord our God, as he has commanded us. And it shall be our righteousness if we observe to do all these commandments before the Lord our God, as he has commanded us. So right away, we see that keeping God's will for us, God's commandments, is righteousness. So in Exodus, we find out something very important and fundamental about God. In chapter 20, verse 6, it says, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. So we have 2 requirements, it seems. Well, we're going to see that those 2 are essentially the same thing. So in the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 15, Jesus says, if you love me, keep my commandments. And a few verses later, in verse 21, he says, he that has my commandments and keeps them, he it is that loves me. And he that loves me shall be loved of my Father, and I will love him and will manifest myself to him. And then we are given the definition of love. It's very similar to Deuteronomy 6, verse 25. It's very simple, very concise. It's found in 1 John chapter 5, verse 3, and it says, for this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous. And so, sometimes you have these people that don't want to have this sort of definition. They don't want to take this as a definition. They feel in their hearts that however they decide to define love towards God or towards another or even towards themselves is however they feel. Well, there's a logical fallacy behind that, in that nobody's all going to agree on the same definition of love. Love is going to become subjective and based on emotion. So, let's say we have 2 people, person A, person B. Person A is asked, what is love to you, person A? And person A responds, well, to me, love is a sacrifice. Love is taking some hours off of work, and it is going over to my mother's house and helping her run some errands and get around the house. Okay, person B. what do you think love is? Well, to me, love is affection. Love is hugs and kisses, and it's little gifts. It's leaving flowers on the counter for my spouse. And so, although these things would both be good things to do, love cannot be subjective. Even though most people are going to have a general definition along those lines, you're going to get some people that aren't going to agree whatsoever about love. And so, I think that's why we're given the definition so simply and so concisely in 1 John. So, moving on, well, actually moving a little before, in chapter 4, verse 8, John writes, "He that loves not knows not God, for God is love." And wait a minute, I thought love was keeping the commandments. I thought that was, for this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. Well, God is love. Well, what does that mean? So, essentially, I'm going to say that God is almost, in a way, synonymous with love. Right? Because, and it says, for God is love. But here you have God, and then you have what love is, which is keeping the commandments. And you see, the way the commandments, the law, the way God prescribed his people to live life is his standard of righteousness, right? And so his standard of morality, or whatever you want to call it, is strictly based on the character of God, and that those are his ways. And so we can see that those two are essentially synonymous, more or less. And so moving on to 1 John chapter 2, verses 3 through 6, John writes something very, very, very important. Something a lot of people don't want to read today. He writes, "And hereby we know that we know him, if we keep his commandments. He that says, I know him, and keeps not his commandments, is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoso keeps his word, in him verily is the love of God perfected. Hereby know we that we are in him. He that says he abides in him ought himself also so to walk, even as he walked." I'm going to emphasize that again. He that says he abides in him ought himself to walk just as he walked. That's a very strong statement. And that sort of leads us to our next question. So the standard of righteousness that God has, that is strictly based on the characteristics, the very being of God and his ways and his righteousness, right? Does that change? Does the law change? Well, let's go to Psalms, chapter 119, verse 142. "Thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law is truth." Now recall Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 25. Righteousness is everlasting. So, remember what is righteousness? That is the ways, the keeping of the commandments, the ways of God, right, as prescribed by him. They're everlasting, according to the psalm right here. And another important thing, it says the law is truth. You're to worship in spirit and truth. Now, does God change? If we're going to be honest with ourselves, we should say no. It should be a very, very simple question. No, God does not change, right? Well, a lot of people try to make it so he does change. A lot of people don't like certain things that God says in his book. So they say, well, that's not really convenient for me, or the life I'm living right now doesn't reflect the ways of God. So, maybe that's not what God meant, right? Well, in Malachi, we see here that God does not change. For I am the Lord, I change not. So far we have God that doesn't change. Then we have the law, his ways, right, that doesn't change, which is also called the Word. And then we have somebody else, right? We have the Messiah. And everybody knows John chapter 1, or at least you should. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. And going down to verse 14, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. So, a lot of people, you could probably already see where I'm going with this. A lot of people want to make it in that Jesus came and he changed a lot of things, right? Well, does that make sense? Can he, logically speaking, can he be the Messiah if he is going to change God's ways? So you have God that never changes. You have the Word that never changes. Now you have the Word becoming flesh, right? Can the Word change? Can the Word that never changes,